pier became a storm of light and sound. Floodlights burning like false suns overhead, muzzle flashes strobing against the sea mist, bullets ricocheting from steel containers and shrieks that cut through Emily's skull. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her teeth. This wasn't a fight. It was an orchestration, a symphony of violence the Orbis had written and she and Marcus were now unwilling instruments inside of. Marcus dragged her behind a stack of crates. Crash at their heels, ears flat, teeth bared. Splinters burst around them as rounds chewed through the wood. Marcus, calm even in the maelstrom, slapped a fresh magazine into a stolen rifle. His hands steady as though the world weren't collapsing around them. "They're pushing us toward the water," Marcus growled, peeking out just long enough to drop one of the shadows in black. Classic corralling maneuver. They want us penned, not dead. Emily's throat felt tight. "Then we break the script." Her uncle's voice whispered from memory. "When you're outnumbered, stop playing their numbers game. Change the board." She grabbed a flare from her belt. Marcus had insisted she carry one just in case. She hadn't asked in case of what. Now she knew. She lit it, sparks hissing bright crimson, and hurled it high into the air. It arced like a comet, landing against an open-fuel drum near the dock's crane. The fireball erupted with a roar that shook the pier. Heat slapped Emily's face, searing the air with a wave of flame. Soldiers scattered back, their tight formation unraveling. The floodlights flickered in the haze. Marcus barked a laugh, short, sharp, a release of tension. "That's how you redraw the board." They surged forward, using the chaos as cover. Emily darted low, knife flashing, crash lunging at knees and throats. Marcus moved like a machine, precise bursts of gunfire cutting gaps in the tide. But for every soldier they dropped, two more seemed to emerge from the maze of containers. And then Emily realized it. None of the shots were aimed to kill. Bullets hissed inches from her, drove splinters from walls, shattered glass. But never center mass. Never a clean kill shot. "They're herding us to the container," she gasped. Marcus's face hardened. "Which means whatever's in there is the point." Another flood of troops poured in, pushing them closer to the gaping mouth of 42L. The container yawned open like a maw, shadows shifting inside. The air around it felt wrong, thicker somehow, humming with a presence Emily couldn't name. Crash froze, hackles raised, growl low and primal. Emily gripped her knife tighter, her pulse drumming in her ears. Marcus slammed his shoulder into a soldier and snapped the rifle from his hands. "We're not done yet." But even as they fought, Emily's gaze was pulled, inexorably, back to the darkness inside that container. Something or someone was waiting for her there. The firefight roared around them. Gunfire, shouting, the crash of boots on steel. But all of it seemed to dissolve into static as Emily's eyes locked on the container. 42L gaped open, its dark interior yawning like a throat, swallowing every ounce of light the flood lamps tried to throw inside. Something about it pulled at her, magnetic and merciless, as if her blood already knew the truth that her mind refused to say out loud. Crash whined, tugging against her leg, tail stiff as a rod. Marcus planted himself between her and the open maw, firing controlled bursts, but even he kept stealing glances at that darkness, jaw clenched. "Emily," he barked. "Don't." But she was already moving. Her boots struck steel, each step echoing inside her bones. She gripped the knife in one hand, her uncle's notebook in the other, the leather warm like a heartbeat. The air grew colder as she neared, heavy with salt and iron. Then movement. A shape shifted within. A figure stepped out from shadow, shackles dragging against the container floor with a sickening scrape. His face was gaunt, beard overgrown, but the eyes, those eyes were unmistakable. "Uncle Ray." Emily's voice cracked on the name, disbelieving. The man smiled weakly, as if the act itself cost him more than he had left to give. "You shouldn't have come, kiddo." His voice was hoarse, but alive, each syllable both bomb and blade. Marcus's gun wavered, his face hardening. "Ray, they used you as bait." The soldiers closed in around them, tightening the noose, rifle steady. But they didn't fire. They waited, watched, as if the reunion itself was the point. Emily staggered closer, rage and relief colliding inside her chest until it felt like her ribs might crack. "You left me clues. You left me that key." Ray coughed, the sound raw, wet. "I left you a choice. Didn't think you'd take it." His chains rattled as he shifted, his body half bowed under their weight. "They wanted you here, Em. Your leverage now. Against me." Emily's stomach turned cold. The symbol, the notebook, the chase. It had all been a funnel leading to this moment. Not fate. Not coincidence. A design. Behind her, Marcus swore under his breath. "We're boxed in. No cover, no clean exit." Ray raised his head then, and for the first time his gaze cut past Emily to Marcus. Something passed between them, recognition, history, guilt. "They're not just after me," Ray rasped. "They're after her. She's the one who can finish what I couldn't." The Orbis soldiers adjusted their stance, rifles angling, waiting for a single command to fall. The floodlights burned hotter, brighter, bleaching the world until Emily felt like her skin was dissolving into the night. She tightened her grip on the knife, teeth gritted. If this was the trap, she thought, then the only way out was to break it from the inside. The dock was a crucible, floodlights scorching white, rifles trained, shadows pressed in tight as a cage. Emily stood frozen between the past and the present, between her uncle shackled in chains and Marcus braced for war. Crash growled low, a vibration that trembled through her boot soles. The lead Orbis soldier stepped forward, visor gleaming, rifle steady. His voice crackled through a speaker, hollow and cold. "Deliver the notebook. Step back. No harm comes to him." The notebook, of course. Emily's fist tightened around the leather-bound pages as if it were part of her own flesh. All those maps, symbols, cryptic warnings. Ray hadn't been hunted just because he was a liability. He'd been carrying the playbook. And now they wanted to rip it from her hands. Her uncle coughed, forcing his voice out through grit and blood. "Don't give it to them, Em. You hand that over. And you're not just betraying me. You're betraying everyone." The soldier took another step. Crash's snarl deepened, sharp as breaking glass. Emily looked to Marcus. His jaw was locked tight, his weapon raised, eyes flicking across the scene in microcalculations. 15 men, 3 angles of fire, 1 crane rig that hung a rusted cargo load above the pier, 1 fuel line snaking along the dock's edge. He met her gaze and gave the smallest nod. "Board. Flip it." Emily moved first. She snapped her wrist and hurled the notebook into the air. Not toward the soldier, but up. Pages fanned open, catching the floodlights like burning wings. Instinctively, rifles tracked it. And in that sliver of distraction, Marcus opened fire. The first 3 soldiers went down in controlled bursts. Crash lunged into a fourth, ripping him sideways. Emily dove low, snagged a sidearm from a fallen body, and rolled toward her uncle. Bullets cracked and shrieked overhead, sparks showering off steel. "Cut me loose," Ray shouted, yanking his chains taut. Emily raised the pistol and fired twice. The links snapped, ricocheting fragments biting into her cheek. Ray collapsed forward, but Marcus was there, hauling him up by one arm. "Move!" Marcus bellowed. The Orbis line regrouped, muzzle flashes painting the pier in strobing carnage. Emily fired blindly as she dragged Crash back, the dog refusing to retreat, snarling at shadows. The air stank of cordite and burning fuel. Then Marcus saw it, the crane rig. With his free hand, he unclipped a grenade from a dead soldier's vest, yanked the pin with his teeth, and lobbed it high. It clanged against the steel girder and lodged there like fate itself had decided to cooperate for once. The explosion ripped through the night, a thunderclap of fire and steel. The suspended cargo load, a container half the size of a house, snapped free and plummeted. It slammed onto the pier with a seismic crash, shattering the dock and sending a tidal surge of seawater and debris roaring over everything. The Orbis soldiers scattered, some crushed under the steel, others hurled into the dark water. Floodlights shattered, plunging half the pier into shadow. "Go!" Marcus roared. He half-carried Ray, Emily flanking them, Crash darting ahead like a ghost in the chaos. Gunfire still chased them, muzzle flashes sparking in the smoke. Emily fired back until her pistol clicked dry, then threw it aside. Her lungs burned, her ears rang, her legs screamed with every step across the trembling dock. Ahead, the van. Their van. Miraculously still waiting, engine idling like it had known they'd come running. Marcus shoved Ray inside. Crash leapt in after, and Emily slammed the door as rounds punched into the steel siding. The driver, same silent figure as before, didn't wait for an order. Tires screamed, rubber burned, and the van fishtailed off the pier just as another grenade detonated behind them, the shockwave rocking them sideways but not toppling them. Emily clutched the duffel of salvaged gear to her chest, Ray groaning weakly against her shoulder. Marcus braced at the door with rifle ready, and Crash curled at her feet, muzzle flecked with blood. Behind them, Pier 7 burned, a skeletal silhouette against the black water, fire licking the night sky. They had escaped. But it wasn't victory. It was survival bought at the cost of revealing themselves to the Orbis in full. And as the van hurtled into the dark city streets, Emily realized the truth settling like lead in her gut. The game hadn't ended at Pier 7. It had just begun. The van's engine howled as it tore through the sleeping city, each corner taken too fast, tires hissing against slick asphalt. The burning pier shrank behind them in the rearview mirror, swallowed by smoke and distance. But the battle still rang in Emily's ears like an echo that wouldn't fade. She pressed her palm against her uncle's shoulder, fingers coming away red. Ray was slumped against the metal wall, pale but conscious, his breath shallow and uneven. His wrists were raw where the shackles had bitten, skin torn and angry. "Hold still," Emily whispered, fumbling for the first aid kit they'd yanked from the safe house. Her hands shook, not from inexperience, but from the sudden, crushing realization that the man who'd raised her, the ghost she thought she'd lost, was flesh and blood again. Flesh, blood, and breakable. Ray caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly steady despite his condition. "Don't waste all that tape on me. I've bled worse." Emily blinked back, heat in her eyes. Don't you dare make jokes right now." Crash nosed in close, whining low, licking at Ray's torn wrist as though his own care could seal wounds. Ray actually chuckled, faint but real, scratching the mutt's ear with a trembling hand. "You picked a good one, Em. Smarter than half the people I ever trusted." Marcus sat opposite them, rifle laid across his knees, eyes flicking between the dark road ahead and Ray. He was breathing hard, not from exhaustion but from the weight of choices pressed into silence. "Why didn't you tell her?" Marcus asked finally, voice gravel rough. His gaze locked with Ray's, old anger smoldering. Ray exhaled slow. She deserved a chance at a life. Not this war. Emily's chest nodded. "What war?" Ray's eyes found hers, and for a moment she saw the man who'd taught her how to throw a punch, who'd walked her to school with too much pride in his stride, who'd disappeared one day without explanation. Now that man's face was worn hollow by secrets. "The Orbis don't just move power," he rasped. "They erase anyone who gets in the way. Governments, companies, entire communities, they redraw the world's map like it's chalk on a board. I tried to stop them once. Failed. You," he coughed hard, blood flecking his lip, "you've got what I never had, the instinct to bend when they expect you to break." Silence swallowed the van, broken only by the rattle of loose tools in the back and the distant siren song of police in another part of the city. Emily looked down at the notebook, still clutched tight in her lap. Pages creased, edges burned, but intact. It wasn't just ink on paper anymore, it was inheritance, burden, compass. Marcus leaned forward, his voice softer than Emily had ever heard it. "Ray, what's inside this? Why is she the one who can finish it?" Ray's head tipped back against the metal wall, eyes closing. His answer came faint, like a confession he'd been waiting years to give. "Because she's the only one I trusted enough to carry it after me." The van hit a bump, jolting everyone inside, but Emily barely noticed. Her chest felt carved open, a hollow filling with something terrifying and heavy. She wanted to scream at him, demand why he'd vanished, why he hadn't trusted her sooner, why she was being dragged into a war she never asked for. But instead she only whispered, "I'm not ready." Ray's lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "Neither was I." Crash laid his head on Emily's lap, eyes dark, steady. Marcus's gaze held hers across the dim van, unspoken promise anchoring her to something solid. And for the first time since this began, Emily let herself cry. Not the tears of weakness, but of someone who knew there was no turning back. The road unspooled ahead, black and endless, leading not to safety, but to whatever truth waited on the other side of the Orbis. And though fear dug sharp into her ribs, another voice rose stronger, the one Ray had planted years ago. When the light blinds you, listen for what's behind it. Emily wiped her face with her sleeve, jaw setting hard. She wasn't just listening anymore. She was ready to answer. The van's brakes squealed as Marcus guided it down a hidden ramp into the belly of an abandoned warehouse. The metal shutter groaned shut behind them, sealing off the city's night and drowning out the distant hum of sirens. The place smelled of rust, oil, and old wood smoke. Marcus's safe house, though safe, felt like a gamble more than a promise. Fluorescent strips buzzed overhead, casting the space in sickly light. Makeshift cots lined one wall, ammo crates stacked along another, and in the center, a table scarred by burns and knife cuts. Ray groaned as Marcus and Emily eased him down onto the nearest cot. His breath rattled, but he waved off help with the stubbornness of a man who had refused to die more times than was reasonable. Emily moved to his side, but Marcus shook his head gently. "Give him space. He'll hold. He always does." Emily clenched her fists, torn between anger and fear, but Crash pressed against her legs as if grounding her to the floor. Marcus turned his attention to the table, yanking the battered notebook from Emily's grasp and flipping it open. The pages fluttered like restless wings, covered in raised dents, coded handwriting. Symbols, sketches, partial maps. An entire universe of secrets stitched together in lines of ink. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to a rough sketch of concentric circles overlapping a city grid. "That's not a map of Pier 7. It's bigger. That's the whole Port Authority district." Emily frowned, stepping closer. "And these marks? They're not streets." "No," Marcus muttered. His finger traced them carefully, his brow darkening. "They're tunnels. Old ones. Military grade. Half the city doesn't even know they exist." Ray's voice rasped from the cot, weak but insistent. "The Orbis uses them. Always have. You can burn their surface ops, blow up their ships, but their real roots, they run under your feet. Like veins. Like rot." Emily swallowed hard, eyes locked on the web of lines. It wasn't just a smuggling operation. It was an entire hidden city, a shadow network. Marcus closed the book with a snap, jaw set. "We're not going to survive another run like Pier 7 unless we stop playing defense. We hit them where they don't expect it." Emily's pulse quickened. "Underground." Marcus nodded. "Find the hub. Cut it off. Without their tunnels, they're just thugs with boats and guns." Ray coughed, spitting into a rag, but his eyes burned with fire. "Careful, boy. Those tunnels, they're not just holes in the ground. They're graves waiting to close around you. And Orbis keeps things there. Things you don't want to find." Emily felt the weight of his words pressing into her chest, but she also felt something else. Resolve, sharp and cold. She picked up the notebook again, flipping back through Ray's encoded scribbles until she found one symbol that kept repeating. The distorted compass, drawn larger each time, like an infection spreading. Next to it, a date scrawled in frantic, jagged script. Her stomach dropped. The date was 3 nights from now. "They're planning something," she whispered. "Big. And if we don't move before then..." Marcus met her eyes across the table. "We won't have a city left to fight for." Silence closed around them, broken only by Ray's strained breathing and the low hum of the lights. The safe house felt smaller by the second, the air charged with the promise of choices they couldn't unmake. Emily gripped the notebook tighter, Crash pressing against her side. his steady warmth a reminder that some things, at least, were constant. The war hadn't ended at Pier 7. It had only peeled back the first layer of rot. And now, for the first time, Emily realized she wasn't just surviving her uncle's war. She was stepping into her own. They left the safe house before dawn, when the city still tasted of cold metal and the last embers of someone else's night. Marcus drove with practiced silence, eyes on the road, muscles coiled and ready. Emily sat beside him, notebook tucked against her chest, crash on her lap like a living, warm compass. Ray slept fitfully in the back, pale and bandaged, his breath shallow but steady. "No scouts," Marcus said without looking at her. "No hero moves. We probe. We map. We get out." His voice held the tension of a man who'd learned the cost of letting hope be bigger than caution. Emily heard him. She also heard the date circled in Ray's handwriting, a deadline that felt like a small, ticking bomb. Push or be crushed. Her choices narrowed until they were almost invisible. She pressed her thumb over the key's worn teeth inside her jacket, feeling the leather's edge through fabric like a talisman. Their entry point was an old service grate Marcus had scouted the previous night. A narrow set of stairs leading under the terminal, half hidden behind a concrete slab stained with oil and gum. It smelled of mildew and salt-cooled concrete. The city above hummed faintly, oblivious. Below, the air felt ancient. Marcus moved first, low and lithe, Ray trailing cautiously with a cane more for balance than mobility. Emily followed with Crash at her heels, the dog's paws muffled on cold metal. They slipped into the tunnel like thieves of their own fate. The tunnel swallowed sound. Their flashlights painted a tight cone of white rust flakes, damp bricks, pipes running overhead. The notebook sketches matched reality. Old service conduits, maintenance crawlspaces, the occasional rusted pulley. Marcus traced the wall with gloved fingertips, reading scratch marks and damp stains like an old friend reads a face. "Listen for the hum," he whispered. "Pipes that carry water sound one way, pipes that carry power another. Everything else, voice, machine, stands out." He paused by a junction. On the concrete someone had sprayed that same distorted compass, but here it was smaller, carved into soot as if burned with a cigarette or acid. The symbol felt colder underground, like a stain that had seeped deeper than paint. Emily crouched, fingertips hovering over the glyph. Crash sniffed and wuffed, then pressed his head against her knee, warning and comfort in one wet nose. "They mark their zones," Marcus said softly. "Control points, checkpoints, psychological ownership. They want you to know you're never really alone down here." They moved deeper, the tunnel narrowing until Emily felt the walls breathing in and out with her. The map Ray left had 3 concentric rings. This felt like one of those inner circles, more guarded, more deliberate. Their boots clanged against a metal catwalk as they descended into a maintenance chamber. The chamber opened into a cavernous space where old rail lines converged, unused tracks swallowed by standing water and rusted machinery. It was like stepping into a buried station, the kind of place people only visit in nightmares. And in the center, a door, reinforced steel, whatever had once been painted a company color now flaked away into history. Beside the door, someone had bolted a small plaque. Stamped letters nearly rubbed away, but unmistakable to anyone who dealt in logistics. An old shipping company emblem, the same as on the badge Ray recovered. Below it, another compass symbol scored into the metal. Emily's breath fogged in the flashlight beam. They converted a maintenance hub into a node. Marcus moved to the door and ran his hand along the seam. "This is a hub, all right. If we can crack it, we may find their flowcharts, who moves where and when." He crouched to inspect the lock, an industrial-grade mechanism with wiring and sensors attached. "Electronic failsafes. Not good for amateurs. You're the amateur with tools." Emily's voice was small. She knew enough about Marcus, his military past, his hands that could coax a lock into confession. Yet the thought of failing here, of setting off an alarm and handing the Orbis an invitation to erase them, sat like ice in her belly. Marcus produced a thin device from his pack, paperclip-sized ingenuity and the look of someone who tinkered with things he shouldn't. He worked in silence, breath shallow, knuckles white. Nearby, a drip of water fell into a puddle and broke the tunnel's hush like a dropped pin. Faint click. The panel hummed. The light over the door blinked a heartbeat, and then went dark. Marcus smiled briefly, the kind of tired expression that scared Emily more than anything. "One way in," he said. "One way out if we're careful." They slipped through. On the other side was a room that looked like a control center frozen in the 1990s. Racks of hardware, dusty monitors, strips of paper logs curling in the corner. A humming generator under a tarp breathed like a sleeping beast. Emily's light caught a collection of binders on a shelf. Their titles were mundane: incoming manifests, night routes, crew IDs, but the corners were clipped, as if someone had been here recently and was careful to leave it tidy. She rifled through one. Inside were names crossed out and replaced, manifest forgery at an industrial scale. Dates shifted by weeks. Signatures that matched and unmatched, the kind of paper trail obfuscation that could make anyone vanish. A sticky note fluttered free and landed in her lap. Phase 2. Begin March 28th. Use rail lines 4 to 9. Move at 0-200. The date 3 nights away matched Ray's frantic symbol. Marcus found a terminal and pressed a sequence of commands. The monitor flickered to life and displayed a grainy map. Lines of rails like a spiderweb, nodes pulsing faintly where containers moved in a rhythm only a specialist could read. Emily leaned in. One node pulsed brighter than the rest. An intersection under the Old North Bridge. Coordinates circled in red. "That's not a hub," she whispered. "It's the spine." Her mouth went dry. "If Phase 2 starts there, it hits the whole network," Marcus finished. "Cut that spine and their schedule collapses. But it's guarded, underground is their safe place. That maps how they're keeping themselves invisible." A faint noise, soft, mechanical, shifted the air behind them like a held breath. Marcus spun, gun raised. Ray grunted and pushed himself upright, leaning heavily on his cane despite the tremor in his hands. From the shadows stepped a figure, not in black tactical gear but in a gray jumpsuit, palms raised. He looked like a maintenance man who'd been living in too much light. Gaunt, eyes rimmed with fatigue, but human. The man's face broke when he saw Ray. "You should have stayed hidden," he said, voice cracked. "You should have let the world forget you." Ray's gaze cut to Emily and then Marcus. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded. The man's breath came ragged. He nodded toward a small handheld device clipped to his belt. An employee transponder. "Name's Jonah. I used to work the docks. Didn't know what I was moving until they told me to stop asking. I left. I watched them change things. They promise people protection. They promise work. Then they bury the rest." He swallowed. "I can get you into the bridge node, but not alone. They'll know someone went in. They'll respond." Emily's chest tightened. She could feel the cruel calculation forming. A local with insider knowledge. A man who had seen the machinery of the Orbis up close. He was both a risk and a bridge. Marcus's posture didn't change, but his eyes softened with the recognition of utility. "You get us in, we get out fast. You lead. You survive." Jonah's voice was a dry rasp. "I don't get out easy, but I can do one thing. Make sure the spine splinters in one place so the rest of the network can't hold." Emily thought of the date scrawled in Ray's notebook and the lineup of priorities that had just hardened into plan. The risk was enormous. The payoff, if the map was right, could cripple the Orbis's scheduled Phase 2. She looked at Marcus, then Ray, then the man who had offered them the key to the next layer. Crash nudged her hand, patient and sure. "Then we do it," she said, voice small and unbreakable. "We hit North Bridge. We cut the spine." Marcus gave the briefest nod. Ray's lips trembled, then curled into a half-smile that was part pride and part warning. Jonah exhaled, a thin sound like rust sliding off metal. 3 nights, he said, and they'll be waiting. The tunnel swallowed the sound, and above them the city moved on, ignorant of the teeth beneath its feet. They had a plan. They had allies with shaky hands and necessary knowledge. They had a deadline that ticked like a bone. And for the first time since she'd been sleeping in a warehouse, Emily felt the shape of an answer, dangerous, imperfect, and precisely the kind she'd been raised to fight. They moved at 0-103 of them plus Jonah, hunger and fear braided into a single purpose. The city was a sleeping animal, its belly full of lights and the careless breaths of people who thought their world secure. Below the bridge, the river moved black and indifferent. Above, the Old North Bridge arched like a jaw, cables humming with wind. Jonah led, a whisper of a man who knew which lights never woke and which cameras blinked but didn't see. Emily's heart beat in a tight, steady rhythm. Training, memory, the lessons Ray had taught her all folding into motion. Marcus carried demolition charges disguised in a beat-up toolkit. Jonah had the access codes murmured into a dirty phone. Ray, bandaged but determined, held the Polaroid and the little metal key like a priest with a relic. Crash padded close, silent as shadow. They scaled the maintenance access beneath the bridge, the metal steps slick with age. Jonah hacked a panel and the first barrier side open, a small success that tasted like coin. They crept through service catwalks, the night air biting at exposed skin, silhouettes stretching long under sodium lamps far below. The hub was a cavern of concrete and steel, a pulse point in the spine that pulsed with a low mechanical heartbeat. Conveyors, hydraulic pumps, a tangle of rails disappearing into vaults beneath the city. Cameras dangled on short arms like cold, disinterested flies. Jonah pointed out guard rotations, 2 walks and a staggered sweep, leaving a narrow window. "This is it," Marcus whispered. 2 minutes tops once we move." He handed Emily a small device, EM disruptor, jury-rigged. "This will blind the cameras for 15 seconds. That's all you get. Make it count." Emily swallowed, sliding the device into her palm. Her fingers brushed the notebook in her pack. Ray's maps, the dates circled in frantic black ink. She thought of every shove and training session, every time he'd said, "Control the panic and you control the moment." She breathed in slow, filed the fear into a neat drawer, and stepped into position. They moved like ghosts. Jonah disabled 2 perimeter sensors with the edge of a sharpened screwdriver. Marcus dropped 2 sleeping guards with a practiced silent efficiency, strikes to pressure points, the kind that didn't scream. Emily's knees burned with the effort of holding still as the seconds clicked, but she didn't falter. At the hub's nerve center, a vaulted chamber lined with maintenance panels. Emily set the charges with hands that trembled but did not betray her. Each charge anchored to a coupling, a junction that fed the main conveyor's hydraulic drive. Blow these and the spine would spasm, fail, cascade, an orchestrated collapse that would scramble the schedule for every container moving on rails 4 through 9. Jonah worked furiously at a console, rerouting power and keeping the alarm loops looped. Marcus watched the stairwell, gun ready, jaw clenched like a man who'd seen too many good plans go sideways. "Ready," Jonah mouthed. Emily's nod was a fraction of motion. She pressed the small button on her disruptor. The cameras dipped into static like eyes closing. A hush fell over the hub as if the world itself paused to hold its breath. 15 seconds. She hit the detonator. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The world waited, a taut string. Then the charges detonated with the kind of force that rewrites metal, an impact like an animal's roar swallowed into brick. Pipes rattled, the conveyor shuddered, and a chain reaction of collapsed braces sent a shower of sparks and grinding steel through the chamber. Somewhere down the spine, switches tripped, sequences failed, and for the first time in months the Orbis's hidden arteries hiccuped. Alarms that had lived in the backs of men's minds. A distant chime here, a red LED there, flared to angry life. Floodlights on distant platforms blinked awake and then went black as backup power routed the wrong way. The network hiccuped in a way only years of experience could make meaning of. They had bought disruption. They had also painted a target on their backs. The initial sweep staggered into disorder. Guards shouted as protocols kicked in. A handful of runners tried to storm the hub. Marcus moved with cold violence, dropping one attacker after another, his radio a bark of commands. Jonah fought like a man who had spent his life inside the machinery he now betrayed. Emily ducked as a security drone. No bigger than a pigeon, metal wings snapping. Swooped low and clipped her shoulder, sparks spraying like starbursts. Crash bit at its legs and sent it spiraling into a stack of crates. Then everything narrowed to one brutal choice. A pair of heavy boots thundered down the entrance stairs. Reinforcements, more professional than the guards they dropped. A shadow the size of a fortress appeared at the top of the stairs, and the smell of formal violence filled the air. At their head was a woman in a tailored combat vest, her visor raised to reveal a face like ice. Commander Marin Vale, an Orbis lieutenant whose name Ray had scrawled in that notebook as a warning. She carried herself like someone who'd never been surprised. Going somewhere? Marin's voice was polite as murder. Marcus cursed softly. They were cut off. Jonah swallowed. We can't outrun them. We've got to split the team, he hissed. Emily, take the bridge controls and shove the fallback. Marcus, get Ray out through the rail shaft. I'll cover. No, Emily said before she could think. Her hand found the detonator still warm in her pocket. We do it together. Marin smiled, no warmth, but the kind of knife edge that makes people think of funerals. How brave, she said. How tragic. The corridor narrowed into a melee. Marcus shoved Ray into a maintenance hatch. The old man protested, but Marcus shut him up with a look. Jonah covered the door with a burst of suppressive fire, buying seconds in which every second counted for more than a life. Emily turned, and in that instant the hub filled with movement, the drawn, precise choreography of hand-to-hand, bullets and blood. She fought. She struck where flesh met armor. She broke knuckles against bone. She moved with all the ugly grace Ray had taught her. Twice Marin almost had a bead on her, but Marcus whirled, a blade of rage, and took a round in the shoulder that should have been for Emily. He didn't cry out. He only gripped tighter and moved. They made it to a side exit as Jonah's cover sputtered. The plan had been to split and rendezvous at a prearranged safe house, but the hub had become a maze of flames and sirens. As they spilled onto the maintenance walkways, the river glittered below like a cold promise. Marcus hauled Ray like a sack of coal, jaw clenched, one arm around him. Emily toted the notebook, the thumb drive, the key, the physical proof that Ray's work hadn't been in vain. Behind them, the sound of boots multiplied. Orbis soldiers flooded the catwalks in a human tide. Marin's voice carried on the wind, cold and clear. You cannot unwrite a map. You cannot unmake what is already set. But they could stall it, and stall they did. Jonah, bleeding from a leg wound, grinned through the pain and shouted, Go! Go! I'll loop them. He slammed a power junction open as a crude, desperate dam. Sparks erupted, cables smoked, and a curtain of arc and flame roared outward. The inferno blocked the path where their pursuers would have most quickly followed. Jonah, Marcus started, but Jonah shook his head hard. Do it, he croaked. The man who had been the insider shoved them toward the ladder that led up to the surface, to the bridge's shadow where they'd planned to vanish into city night. They climbed with everything raw and human, lungs burning. Emily's hands were slick with sweat and the notebook's pages stuck. Behind them, Jonah's voice faltered. Then a shout, then silence. The power junction blew in a final, beautiful spasm. Sparks rained like fireworks. Jonah's sacrifice bought them seconds that would stretch like lifetimes. They hit the surface and slid down the bridge's outer span into shadows that smelled of salt and freedom. Below, the damaged hub coughed and screamed as backup systems kicked in. Sirens blinked to life across the city. In the distance, a faint thud told Emily the spine had not collapsed entirely, but it had been nicked enough to slow Phase 2, to force the Orbis to rearrange plans and expend resources. They were bruised, bleeding, and not whole. Marcus had a rag tight around his shoulder where blood bloomed dark. Ray's breathing was ragged but steady. Crash limped but wagged, proud and stubborn as ever. Emily clutched the notebook to her chest and realized the truth Ray had known. War didn't end in dramatic finales. It was a series of choices, small and enormous, each one carving a path forward from which you never returned the same. They had cut the spine. They had bought time, hours, maybe days. The Orbis would be enraged, recalibrating. Phase 2 would be postponed, perhaps rerouted. They had not saved the city. They had made a dent, and in their line of work, dents were victories to be counted like miracles. As they melted into the night, Limping toward their rendezvous and whatever rest awaited, Emily felt something colder and braver settle into her bones. A readiness to trade comfort for consequence, to keep walking until the Orbis's map no longer fit the world they wanted to defend. Above them, on the bridge, the cables hummed like a long, low prayer. Below, in the dark that the Orbis called home, plans were being rewritten. They had the notebook, they had a key, they had momentum, and they had each other scarred, ragged, and stubbornly alive. If you've made it this far, you know this wasn't just a story about survival. It was about courage, sacrifice, and the fire that keeps us pushing forward even when the odds are stacked against us. Evelyn and Marcus may be fictional, but their fight, the refusal to let truth die in the shadows, is very real in our world. If their journey hit you in the gut, if you felt that pulse of defiance in your own chest, then I need you with us. Smash that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Every comment, every click, every voice helps us keep building this community. Thank you for being here, thank you for fighting with us, and I'll see you in the next chapter.